Sen and Ambassador Saran, without your help, we wouldn't have been able to put this together. It's something which we want to do. We did a similar event 5 years back when Trump was coming in, trying to, because we had a similar kind of, I wouldn't say premonitions, but we didn't have a clear idea as to which direction we are going to go. Fortunately, it's okay. I mean, whatever we have gone through is probably global reality, not something peculiar to India. So, to give a formal welcome to you, on behalf of the Policy Perspectives Foundation, it is my pleasure to give a very warm welcome to all our guests present online and participating in the event on a winter evening, afternoon like this. As I mentioned earlier, Ambassador Sen and Ambassador Saran both have been very kind to spare their time to talk about this issue. We propose to have this generally wrapped up in about 1.5 hours time, in which the first part will be when both Ambassador Sen and Ambassador Saran will share their views about the subject. I was informed by Ambassador Sen and, of course, Ambassador Saran that this will take the place of a conversation. And so they will take a conversation mode and we'll have this discussion for about, say, 45 minutes or so. Thereafter, we'll throw up the event for question answer session from the audience. There is something which has come up, so Shyam has to leave around 4:30.
Yeah, 4:30. Even 10 minutes beyond 4:30 is fine.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Those we are sort of adjusting the time. Instead of 2 hours, it will be probably 1 hour, 40 minutes or so. So that's what is there. Then both of them need no. I have a written, but I find it very difficult to introduce both Ambassador Sen and Ambassador Saran, who's both a friend, and one was a mentor in London, and another is a friend and batchmate. So I presume that they are both so eminent and well known in the circles that are interested in international affairs and foreign affairs in India, that I can skip this particular thing of introduction, formal introduction. I'll explain why we have taken them. Our problem is that we are an organization which primarily looks at dangerous subjects of peace, cohesion, and like this within the country. But we realize that none of this is possible internally, because these are the products of the, at least to a great extent, product of the interplay of forces and external factors. So we want to understand which way are we going. This we tried to do in when Trump presidency began. It was a partial success. I hope we achieve a better result when we are dealing with this one. Our main worry is that on many things we have aligned with Trump's line of thinking on global issues. Now, Biden seems to be quite different from that. How different? I leave it to the two honest speakers to tell us. But our worry is that how much do we have to adapt? Because today, new realities have come. The post-pandemic realities are different, and we must understand them and do it. Our neighborhood, with which currently US is locked in a kind of tussle, is also a problem for us, and as well as a trade partner which we cannot ignore so easily. Similarly, we have seen that there are some very serious concerns about technological imports from that country has a reason. And our own industry, particularly the new technology industry, I don't think we can do away with the Chinese import, but at the same time, there is a very, very serious concern about this. How do we deal with this? Both, there is one aspect which is internal regulations and internal this thing, but there is another aspect is how is it shaping in the larger scheme of things externally in the global field. So this is what we want to learn from the two speakers. Now, I was saying to take the proceedings forward, and because our time is shortened by some half an hour or so. So, Ambassador Sain, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Haldar. Thank you for your introductory remarks. There's one clarification I'd like to give and one request. One request is that if everyone except those on the who can be seen, if they can put themselves on mute, and if they are on their PCs or computers, if they can put their mobile phones on mute, it'll help us. The clarification I would like to give is that the Prince of Hamlet, the main speaker, the speaker actually, not the main speaker, today is my colleague, Ambassador Sham Saran. And he's the one who's relevant, because I'm mostly a relic of the past. He's relevant, and he's in every sphere in terms of whether it's on nuclear issues, whether it's on the security issues, as a former chairman of the National Security Advisory Board, and a special envoy on climate change. That's another big issue which we're going to discuss. On a large number of other issues, as well as in academics. He combines both expertise and academics. So he's very much a part of the present. So it will be more in a conversation, will be more in terms of my posing some questions and his giving the clarifications of the answers, and then continuing in that mode. So with that, I would like to set this off straight away. And you, Mr. Haldar, referred to the challenges in the post-COVID world order. Because you rightly pointed out that we can't address issues in silos, internal, external. They're all, if you put them in silos, you'll always come to wrong conclusions. Economic silo, political silo, national security silo, economic silo. They're all interlinked and very much, and one can't be seen without the other. So my first question to my colleague, Sham Saran, is precisely on that, as to how he sees the post-COVID era and what challenges it poses us, and what is the way out, and what maybe there are some corresponding opportunities.
Thank you very much, Ronan. And first of all, let me thank my batchmate and colleague Haldar for inviting me to this very interesting interaction. And I'm particularly honored to share the platform. He's being modest. The project is concerned, which is related to what would a Biden presidency mean for India. He is someone who has served as ambassador to the United States, understands the country perhaps like no other diplomat, and I don't think he's out of date by any stretch of imagination. So I really hope that we can make this into a more equal conversation, if I may call it, so that we can also benefit from his insights. Now, to answer the issue that Ronan has raised about what is likely to be the international landscape in the post-COVID years, and well, we are still in the pandemic stage. We have not quite overcome it, but I think we can make some broad judgments. So one judgment that I can make is, which I hope will prove to be right, is that many of the trends which we witnessed even before the pandemic hit, my sense is that many of those trends are going to be accelerated. To give you an example, if there was already a kind of a shift in the center of gravity of the global economy, moving from the transatlantic to the trans-Pacific, essentially because of the rise of China, but also the rise of India, the dynamism, economic dynamism, which we see displayed in East Asia. What the pandemic has done is that particular shift of the center of gravity has been accentuated. So in a sense, the crucible of the global economy is now much more in the East Asia, Southeast Asia region, less in the Western Hemisphere. That trend had already sort of become evident after the global financial and economic crisis of 2007-2008, where the impact of that crisis on the Western economies was really very, very severe, and it has not yet played itself out. So what this pandemic has done is that all those negative trends have been accentuated. So that's one important change, that the landscape where we will have to find our place, that is going to be very different in the sense that the center of gravity, in a sense, is going to be on the Trans-Pacific. That is one important thing. Second thing is with respect to, say, technological advancement. We are living in an age of very rapid technological development, particularly the emergence of the digital economy. Now, most experts are saying that thanks to the pandemic, what could have taken maybe 5 years or 10 years to be rolled out in terms of the adoption of digital technologies, that has been encapsulated, or that has shrunk to the last several months. What could have happened in 5 years is happening within a year maybe. So in terms of the technological environment that we have to deal with, we have to adapt to, I think the challenge will be far greater than it has been before. And the third important thing, and I will end with this, is that if we are looking at the post-COVID world, what has the COVID-19 demonstrated? It has demonstrated that while we have been, in a sense, doing a kind of a single-minded pursuit of efficiency, of profit, global supply chains, for example, stretched across the globe, now talking about, just-in-time delivery, talking about no inventories having to be maintained. What we today see is that as a result of that, many countries, important countries, have been caught, in a sense, unprepared. So there is today a greater stress going to be put on not just efficiency, but also reliability. So there will be a certain sort of a reweighing of economic risks and benefits. So we will see some reshoring of very strategic industries, very sensitive industry, like, for example, some of the health-related industry. We are also seeing, and this is my last point, that COVID-19 has also demonstrated that if we do not deal with the advancing ecological crisis, of which climate change is a very important component, these kinds of crises will keep recurring in the future and perhaps maybe even more serious. Because essentially this crisis is an ecological crisis. Why has this happened? Because the habitat of wild species is being eroded. Biodiversity is being degraded. And all that is being exacerbated by climate change. So what we are also going to see is that in the post-COVID world, there will be a much greater focus, number one, on, as I said, the risk element will be more prominent than it has been in the past. And secondly, we are going to see a much greater stress on things like climate change and ecological degradation. That is what I see as the post-COVID landscape.
Thank you, Shyam. This leads us to another question in terms of, let's say, the Biden presidency, if you're focusing on that. I mean, obviously, is number one, the central issue, one of the issues we have to tackle is the coronavirus, in which the United States has been arguably the worst affected, and arguably they have handled it the worst. So if you take that, I mean, there are other aspects which are also emerging, in continuation of what you said, not just, shortened supply chains, but greater reliability, but also other factors coming in. Like, what Morarji Desai had told Carter a number of years ago, that plays out in terms of, he says, the Soviet Union, build walls to keep people in, and you build walls to keep people out. And that is also, that aspect is getting global, both in terms of immigration policies based on religion or ethnicity, and in terms of protectionism, which we just spoke about. And those were also highlighted further by, like, for instance, technologies like 3D printing and others, which would enable you actually to localize. And therefore, you'll address the issues of immigration, you'll have the issue of local job creation, at the same time, address a number of other issues. So it was those rather than immigration, though immigration came very much to the fore as a political issue. It is technology which was driving some of those changes, even earlier, and which you rightly pointed out, have accelerated. But in terms of the coronavirus itself, it seems to have also, what you referred to as, inequality. That means you're dividing. There's a north-south divide which has emerged in this. And so could you, give your views on that in terms of how it has highlighted that aspect?
Yeah, so Ronan, if we move now to looking at the prospects with a Biden presidency, let me point out the priorities that Biden himself has sort of spelled out. So one, he has said that the first priority will be to tackle the pandemic itself. As you said, there is a huge impact on the United States. The numbers of people infected is actually expanding at an alarming rate. So this is something which Biden has said, this will be my first priority, how to deal with that. So the focus will shift from the Trump presidency to a much more serious kind of a tackling of this crisis. The second priority that he mentioned was that we have to look at the economy. Because although the American economy, as you remember, Ronan, was doing quite well before the pandemic amongst the Western economies. It was growing at a much faster rate. Unemployment levels were at historic lows. The high-tech companies were, flourishing like never before. So what the pandemic has done is that it has delivered a huge setback to the American economy. And I think it is only I think appropriate that it is going to be very much high on the Biden agenda. How to bring about a recovery of the economy and bring about a recovery which is much more employment generating, because unemployment inequalities that from before. The third element that he has talked about is related to this aspect of inequality, and he has said that making a systemic change in the society in terms of race relations, this is going to be a priority. I mean, you have seen the Black Lives Matter movement, and that has been a hugely dividing kind of a social force. So to try and bring about some degree of reconciliation in a highly divided society, some degree of bipartisanship in what is a very highly polarized, political environment. This was his other priority. And the fourth and only element, which is external oriented, is rebuilding of alliances and partnerships. So you will see that as far as the declared intent of the Biden presidency is concerned, it is very much domestic oriented, not so much external oriented. So if there is an expectation that we are going to see the United States of America, once again emerge as a very, very active, player in the international field, maybe we should be a little less expectant in that respect, because yes, certainly the external environment will be very important, but I think the priorities that he has set are very much domestic oriented. Now, the one point at which the domestic and the external do meet together, in my perspective, is the China factor. Because when you are looking at economic recovery, the general consensus in the United States is that whatever be the change taking place, the biggest challenge for the United States of America on the economic side, on the technological side, is going to be China. So I think some of those domestic priorities will get linked to this major challenge, because that also is somewhat structural in character. Now, as far as India is concerned, we will have to see where do we position ourselves in that landscape. My sense is that maybe we will not be so high in the priority list for a Biden presidency.
Yes, I think you have touched, on the broad canvas, all these elements. But one of the differentiators, to start with what you have ended with, vis-a-vis China, and that is in terms of the ideological aspects. Of course, we both know very well that it's well beyond that. It's basically a race where they find a credible challenger to a global challenger, not just regional, but a global challenger. And China is that challenger in every respect, across the board. So they're the only major differentiator, and from that, everything else follows. That's why they have changed that, even in not naming China, but they call it the CPC, the Communist Party of China, as a challenger, to highlight, at least the previous administration did. I don't think the current administration or the incoming administration will. You won't have those kind of labels, maybe, but that will be that central element. And there, you had India as a differentiator earlier, and to a large extent it continues, but there is a difference where this is going to be posed as autocracies, primarily China, but also Russia, to an extent even countries like where they have concerns like Erdogan, even within the NATO alliance. So in that context, you remember, Sham, earlier, you had right from the Warsaw in 2000 when Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the prime minister. At that time, you joined that. We were practically the only Asian country, apart from Singapore, to a lesser extent Korea. We are part of that concert of democracies, which was launched in Poland. And of course, in a big way, you had this UN Democracy Fund, where you had
to which we contributed.
Yeah, to which we were the second largest contributor, and also it was jointly launched.
Jointly launched by Manmohan Singh and President
Bush. Jointly launched in the presence of all the others, leaders of all the other democracies. So this is going to be one of Biden's, where the differentiator is. In those terms, do you see any, recent developments in both countries? There you have, and they say that we are going to lead by example. We are not going to preach what we don't practice. So you can't tell us, physician, heal thyself. So in that context, before we come to the substantive issues, what is your view on that? On that in the light of a general tendency the world over of looking inwards under whatever guise, whether it's immigration, whether it's efficiency, whether it is greater equality, or those who are left behind, and they are becoming more and more prominent. And the pandemic has brought up that in a very strong light in terms of whether you see in India, you already have the divisions on basis of caste, religious, that is coming to the fore increasingly and becoming a part of the political discourse, but also of class, where you found that in the migrants, for instance, demonstrated in a very vivid manner. So in that context, do you have any insights as to where this will lead, and whether this will be an irrelevant aspect?
I don't think it will be irrelevant. But let me take you back to the time that we were trying to get the Indo-US nuclear deal through. And one of the new things that we started, and that was something in which you were very, very deeply involved, was to try and build a bipartisan consensus, particularly in the US Congress, in support of the initiative. And it took us before had actually been making the rounds of the Congress and meeting, not only supporters, but also people who were against India, in terms of, looking at India as not quite a credible partner for the United States. We actually did a tremendous amount of work to turn that sentiment around. And I think one of the very big gains that India made through that process, the nuclear deal was, of course, an important outcome. But that process, what it did was to create an enduring bipartisan consensus on strengthening of India-US relations. So even when the US politics became very polarized, say under Trump, as far as relations with India were concerned, it had a bipartisan consensus. That is a huge asset, for me, that is one of the most important assets that you have in dealing with the United States. Now, my fear is that that particular bipartisan consensus may get dented somewhat because of the renewed focus on what may be happening domestically in India. Whether it is the issue of Jammu and Kashmir, or whether it is the issue of communal, situation in India, as you mentioned, or looking at other domestic developments here, there may be less of a US giving it a bypass under Biden than was possible under Trump. Trump was not bothered. So this is something which to me has not happened. And I hope it doesn't happen, but I think I would like to just flag it as something that we must watch out for under the Biden presidency. We should make certain that that very important asset we have in terms of that bipartisan consensus, we do not let it get that diluted. So that is one point, what you mentioned. The second point is that a lot of our current, relationship with the United States has got linked to the China factor. So there is also even a sense here that even if there are other issues, but India is so important in terms of that, what we see as a longer term confrontation between the US and China, that essentially the US will have to keep this relationship at a pretty high level. Up to a point, that is true. I grant that. But I think we should be a little careful and little cautious, because I have also pointed out in some of my writings that even though there was very sharp confrontation between the US and the Soviet Union, the then Soviet Union during the Cold War, and you are very familiar with that particular period, that did not detract from the ability of the two sides and the willingness of the two sides to come to compromises on important issues. So, for example, when it came to the non-proliferation treaty, they were exactly on the same page. And we were put in a difficult situation because of that. So do not underestimate the possibility of, despite the confrontation between the two, for them to come to understanding on some larger issues between them, which may, as a fallout, limit your space for maneuver. So, we will come to that, I think, later on in our discussion. But climate change is a very clear issue, where I think there is every chance that, like in 2015, before the Paris Agreement, when Xi Jinping and Obama came to an understanding, and basically that became the template for the Paris Agreement. Now, we may face similar kinds of situation with respect to some other global issues, where a certain, even if limited, certain understanding becomes possible between China and the US. This may cause us problems, so we have to be also alert to that.
Exactly. Now here, I agree with you. Actually, the biggest differentiator, I can tell you, and Shyam, you have been around the US Congress. There was hardly any weekend where I was not in one of the constituencies.
Sure.
I didn't visit 50 states, but I visited 49 states, and button-holding senators, congressmen. Not only that, but in the governors, those legislative assemblies, mayors who are important in that system, across the board. And their central issue was, why India? Why a single one country exemption for India? And the thing was that be like India. Be like India, and the differentiator there was pluralism, democracy, all these different religions living together. And we reached out at that time to FIACONA, that is Federation of Christians of North America, etc. So that was very much a part of the exercise, and that was the biggest differentiator at why India, not just because of its size, because the problem in a sense started with India. Jimmy Carter, we are referring to Jimmy Carter and Morarji Desai, and the Non-Proliferation Act. So it began there, and the differentiator was that, and China was in the background, of course. And as we discussed in another context, the nuclear deal was not principally about nuclear power. We gave unnecessary importance, to some of those aspects, and that distorted the main element of that, which was strategic. And also another aspect was opening the door to new technologies, where we have not benefited after so many years after that opening up. There's one aspect I wanted to, you mentioned climate change also in that context, and you have a new climate change czar, that is John Kerry. Now, now he is, as you know, Massachusetts seems to produce, ideologically oriented people, whether it's on the nuclear issue or on climate change. What is your feeling? I mean, there again, and you highlighted rightly, in many aspects, for whatever reason, that China may seem to be, more accommodative in terms of doing deal, both on certain economic issues as well as on climate change. So, what do you think? What's your estimate on where we can actually, and we have gone to a extraordinary degree in terms of not only the Solar Alliance and many other things, taking nationally determined we have targets. So what is your view on, obviously this is an area where we can just bind, come closer to with the new administration. But there again, you have the Republicans taking a diametrically opposite view. So in terms of bipartisan consensus, what is your view on which way we are heading in that?
Well, number one, that Biden has put climate change at the top of his administration's agenda is something that one should certainly welcome because it needs that kind of focus. That Biden has said that he will be returning to the Paris Agreement. Again, even though the Paris Agreement is a rather weak agreement, but having the US inside is very important because it is, after all, the largest economy in the world, and what the US does counts for others as well. So those are positive trends. To the extent that it opens up for the US and India to work together on, say, clean energy or renewable energy, again, that is most welcome. And as you said, India has actually a good story to tell as far as action on climate change is concerned. Solar Alliance is a very important example of that. Many people do not know that even though there is a focus on coal, but India has actually done much. Number one, discourage coal may not have a carbon tax, but we have a 400 rupees per ton cess on coal, all of which is available then for clean energy investment. These are not unimportant, initiatives that India has taken. So, as I said, good story to tell. But what is my fear? My fear is, number one, you have in the United States today a commitment to making climate change action part of national security. So you are raising it to the level of national security, which means that there could be a different approach when you are looking at what other countries are doing, because what they may be doing or not doing is going to be looked through a national security angle. That is something which may be problematical. Second is making John Kerry the special envoy for climate change with a place in the National Security Council. So you are giving him a tremendous sort of authority in terms of taking the climate change portfolio forward. Now, my view of John Kerry is negative, because I have dealt with him in the past when I was chief negotiator on climate change. And he's very sanctimonious. He thinks that, there is a kind of an evangelical, sort of approach that he must have to climate change. Has made it that the focus is going to be on coal. That is, how do we prevent countries who are currently using coal for producing power, that they must commit themselves to reducing the use of coal for power generation. Now, even though in total capacity, our thermal capacity is rather a small proportion of the global capacity, but yes, I mean, our coal-based thermal power has been rising. Although not anymore really, because we are our demand for power has actually gone down because of the slowing down of the economy. But there is going to be a focus on coal, and there will be pressures on us. Secondly, there will be also a commitment on the part of the US and Europe to introduce border carbon taxes. That is, the embedded carbon in goods which are being imported will be taken into account when they are imported, which means that it becomes a trade limiting measure. And particularly when you have overall a protectionist sentiment all over the world, this becomes a very convenient excuse to keep imports out. So this is something that we have to look out for as far as the climate change problem is concerned. So overall, yes, positive, but there are major components where we may run into some difficulty, and there could be a possibility of a deal between the US and China. So Kerry has also made it clear that, while there may be this strategic confrontation with China, but, we have to work together on global issues. And one of the global issues on which we can work together with China is climate change. Now, we know perfectly well that if you are going to be working on this major issue, you cannot say, but I will keep pummeling you as far as other aspects of our relations are concerned. That is simply not doable. So I think we have to therefore look at what climate change per se will bring pressures on us, and secondly, what it may do in terms of reorienting somewhat in a somewhat positive direction the US-China relationship, because that also will have an impact on us. Yeah.
Right. So that takes us, thanks for giving that backdrop, because I think it's not, appreciated, and hopefully, all this will be tackled, and hopefully it will not arise. But coming to the Indo-Pacific, which you referred to, and specifically, let's say, in terms of the Quad, on which, on this there has been significant movement in recent years, and particularly, and the impact of that, obviously, in terms of our defense cooperation, which again began actually in 2005, the new phase. It had begun actually in the 80s, but the new phase began in 2005, just a month before the nuclear deal was finalized. That's in June 2005. Where do you see that headed in the context of what we have just said? And there again, with China, looming as a major factor. And specifically in terms of the Quad, and as you already pointed out, there are other aspects that is the flip side of the coin in terms of our pulling out of the RCEP, which is the economic dimension, and are not and CPTPP being it's a bit too far. If you can't do a low ambition RCEP, that is so there again the dangers of falling in between two stools, and with FTAs becoming increasingly problematic, both with EU and the US. Where does this leave us? So just your general views on that.
So let me make a general point that, you cannot hope to play an expansive external role without in fact having a strong economic pillar as part and parcel of that role. So if we are thinking that it's only on the security, also, both these are important. through the membership in danger of pushing yourself to the margin of the regional economy and to the margin of the global economy. I'll take you back to what I said right in the beginning, that the center of gravity of the global economy has shifted even more to the east. That means the sources of future growth of the global economy are going to come from this region, precisely the region which is defined by the RCEP. So if you are looking at what are the drivers of growth for India in the future, then why are you closing yourself off from the most dynamic part of the global economy, which is the one which is growing, not Europe, not the United States of America? So that is a question that needs to be answered. Second, there are those who may be talking about, oh, but we can look at a free trade agreement with the United States of America or a free trade agreement with Europe. That is where we are actually selling more. Our trade surpluses are more with the US, more with the European Union, not really with the East. What this misses out is that RCEP was actually what may be called a low standard trading arrangement. Much more focused on goods, much more focused on tariffs, less on regulatory mechanisms, less on things like standards. Now, if you are unable to adjust to a fairly basic and low-level trade agreement, how the hell do you believe that you will be able to adjust to a much more high standard agreement that would be demanded by Europe and would be demanded by the US? So this is to me somewhat unrealistic. If this is the way we are looking at it. Now, the other issue is, as you pointed out, that not only RCEP, but what you have in the works is the TPP without the US, but there is also a anticipation that Biden may well decide to come back to the TPP. That means our marginalization will be even more if the US comes in. And now at the last APEC meeting, the Chinese, the Americans, the Japanese have been talking about how about a Asia-Pacific free trade agreement, an even larger sort of a canvas. So where are you going to be? So this is one very important challenge that I think going forward we will face, and we need to rethink some of the assumptions that we are making. That's one point I would like to make. Second is that with regard to the Indo-Pacific strategy, certainly there is no doubt that it has started crystallizing more as a more coherent kind of a grouping. And it is also, I think, a fact that with the signing of the 3 foundational agreements with the United States, which has been in the sort of works for quite some time, the basis for very much closer security cooperation, not only with the United States, but with Japan, with Australia, that, has also, increased considerably. There's no doubt about that. The other aspect that is important is that, we have started talking in terms of this being a very critical component of the security landscape in the region. So we are maybe hesitantly, but we are moving in that direction. And I think I have said in one of my articles that we must thank the Chinese for. I think the Indo-Pacific strategy is going forward. It is also very worthwhile to note that, say, Germany, France, Germany, France, and the UK, all 3, in a sense, are signing on to a Indo-Pacific strategy. So it's not only going to be the 4 countries, but it's, you are getting other countries which are also sort of gravitating towards it, which reflects that it is being taken seriously. And I think, in a larger context, perhaps informally, countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, Singapore, they may very well, also start gravitating towards this. So this is something which is potentially very important. But let me also point out that it is still in the stage of a hedging exercise. It is still a bit of this flag waving rather than really getting down to working closely together. So I have pointed out in one of my articles that if it really is to crystallize, then I see no reason why you can't even come out with a joint statement amongst the four countries. We still have, we're still doing separate statements. Or why don't we take common positions on some things on which we all agree? For example, we all agree that as far as the South China Sea is concerned, we cannot accept the unilateral sort of claims being put by China. Or that we do not accept that there can be sort of unilaterally defense information zones being established without consulting other countries at all, or that the law of sea can be only observed selectively. So there are ways in which I think the Accord, and with that the Indo-Pacific strategy, can be made somewhat more credible than it is today. It has not yet reached a point where I think if I was sitting in Beijing, I would not worry too much about it. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Just another factor before we, I think, open up. I think two questions. One is, China has now, from all that we have spoken about, whether it's climate or the virus, coronavirus, or the trade strategy and all that, it's increasingly occupying a central, it's becoming a central factor in our relationship with the outside world. We have not even touched upon our immediate neighborhood, which is so critical, because for any aspiring power, that's all, it's a basic prerequisite to have, good relationship with the immediate neighbors. But generally, is that in our interest to make, because in a sense, yes, they can set the pace. They can control the pace, the direction of your relationship with one action or some inaction in some direction. And the other aspect is China's closest partner now, which remains a vitally important partner, at least as far as our defense and national security requirements are concerned, that is Russia. And the way that is heading, because there's increasingly, they are closing ranks. They're obviously in the longer term, and we both know that there are very strong misgivings, particularly in Russia, which I've observed is one unchanged factor, but that's increasingly receding in terms of actual decisions. And this I've come across right throughout, right from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. It was there. It was quite pronounced. So, in the light of that, where do you think that our partnership with the United States, or for that matter, in the larger area, in the Indo-Pacific or in the Asian context of a Asian, security architecture, where do you think, what do you think the challenges will be in terms of, and how do we adjust to that?
Even though maintaining the kind of very close relationship that we have enjoyed with Russia is becoming somewhat more difficult, but let me make the point that for India, maintaining that relationship in good order is in India's long-term interests. So yes, we may be worried about the fact that some of the more enduring factors that you mentioned may be muted because Russia is facing a lot of pressure from the West, from the United States of America. So it has, in a sense, no other way but to strengthen this relationship with China. But having said that, it doesn't mean that other factors are not operating. So to give you an example, you have seen recently that, for example, in Tajikistan, where the Tajiks would have been rather muted in protesting against Chinese incursions on the Pamir area, they are speaking out. I doubt whether they would be speaking out unless they had some degree of encouragement from Russia, because Russia is the chief security partner. You see a certain pushback also in Kazakhstan on what the Chinese are doing. One of the very major, sort of cementing factors between Russia and China has been the energy partnership. Now you have a 30-year agreement for supply of oil and gas. But, China is now saying, oh, but, the oil prices have crashed. So whatever price we had agreed upon, we don't need to pay that much now. Now that is becoming a important controversy between the two sides, that you are not maintaining your commitments. The other issue which is likely to become more salient is the nuclear issue. Because so far, yes, the US and Russia had the largest number of, nuclear weapons and delivery systems. China was still far behind. So you could argue that essentially the US and China has over the last 20 years or so has become a very important nuclear weapon state, and a very in terms of delivery capability, it is almost on a par with the others. And Russia, even though the relationship today may be okay, but they are also concerned that right next door they have a country, a very powerful country, a country which is becoming richer, on which there are no limitations, no restraints as far as the nuclear deterrent is concerned. So they are, in fact, encouraging that we should have a strategic dialogue now, which should include China, because that's not in Soviet Union, Russia's interest. And on the economic side, I also look at the Russian interest in India, because we would not have made it to a membership of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization if Russia had not pushed our case as enthusiastically as it did. Because the Chinese were certainly not very happy to have us in the SCO. So I can see that there is on both sides, there is an interest in keeping this relationship in good order, because the overall strategic situation still demands it. And so I don't think that because we see Russia in bed with China today, or that it is in some senses following the Chinese lead on some issues, that we should therefore forget about Russia. No, I don't think we should do that. But that leaves open the issue of how do we deal with China. So the Russian relationship is at least still a part of that answer. The other answer is, how do we build up a network of other relationships which can help us deal with the unilateral assertion of power by China. And yes, the Indo-Pacific strategy is certainly a part of that. Ultimately, I keep arguing that the only way to deal with this challenge is by getting India back to a high growth trajectory. Because unless you once again begin to be seen as a country which is actually shrinking the power gap with China, your credibility as a partner and your credibility even as an adversary will be somewhat limited.
Thank you, Shyam. I think it's been. I think we have covered a fair amount of ground, and there again to go back to that period of time when I was in the, let's say, United States, and when the nuclear deal and the defense agreement was made. we were growing at an average rate of 8.5%.
That made
2
all the
years,
difference.
9%. 2 years, 9% growth rate.
Yeah.
And also, the both ways trade and investments were growing pretty rapidly. And US exports to India had quadrupled
Sure.
in 5 years, while our exports roughly doubled, less than doubled, about 80% increase. So it was perceived to be a two-way kind of thing. Therefore, you had less of those pressures. But now
Yep.
it's, I think,
Yeah.
high time that we opened it up to questions and answers. So I hand over to Mr. Haldar.
Thank you, sir. We have one question.
Thank you very much, Ronan, for this lovely conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Shyam. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been a very lively discussion so far. We have a question here from Professor Gautam Sen. Because of his connectivity problem, he had to come out of it. He's not getting it through. But his question is, to ascertain what type of leadership is emerging, how do we quantify leadership across the spectrum, US, India, China, to face the new normal? This includes climate change linked with national security. Again, the assessment of leadership. Once we quantify projection of trends, will be clear whether how to go forward. And then, has India also quantified the leadership capabilities? I mean, I think question is pretty.
Well, I am not qualified to, I think, answer question on leadership quantification. But as a general sort of comment, I would say that obviously the quality of leadership is going to be critical in how countries deal with some very unfamiliar challenges that we are faced with today. These are not ordinary challenges. So whether we have a leadership that not only recognizes the gravity of the situation which we are facing, but is ready to take some risks that are inevitable in trying to deal with them. You can either follow the herd, you become a leader by adjusting yourself to the sentiments of the mass or of the crowd. The other more difficult is, how do you lead people in the direction that you want them to go? And that's much more difficult. So whether, the countries that you mentioned, whether they will have leadership that is able to take people along in the direction that they need to, despite those being somewhat risky in a sense, that is going to be the test of a leadership. And I think partly the depressing situation is that when you have a kind of an atmosphere where each country is saying my country first, and is actually looking at more populist kind of ways of keeping hold on power, it is very difficult to actually see whether that kind of a leadership is really there, available to deal with these issues. That is why perhaps the risks that we are facing going forward are maybe more than maybe we would have in the past.
Thank you. I think next I will go to Mrs. Indira Bagchi, but before that, there is another question which awaiting for all panelists. President-elect Joe Biden had been friendly towards India even before he had been elected to US VP in 2008. However, he was also well disposed towards Pakistan. He was a big supporter of the Enhanced Partnership with Pakistan Act of 2009, which is a Kerry-Lagur bill. A grateful Pakistan had awarded its second highest civilian award, Hilal-e-Pakistan, to him also. Biden in his election campaign website has been critical of recent Indian steps in Kashmir, NRC, and the CAA. Pakistan will certainly try to revive its old relationship with Biden and capitalized on his reservations on the above issues. How do you think the Pakistani efforts could play out? This is Sanjay Sinha, one of our members.
Do you want me to answer that question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I very firmly believe that while personalities matter in relations between states, interests matter more. So I think going forward, how the United States of America deals with Pakistan will be determined not by what the real sort of interests are of the two sides. Now, in that context, the fact that Pakistan has become so much of an integral component of China's regional and global strategies, that will be something that the US will have to take into account. Secondly, a lot will also depend, to my mind, on what happens with regard to the Afghan situation. Because at this particular point of time, Pakistan continues to be of importance to the United States because it is seen as one of the keys to lead to a peace settlement in Afghanistan. Now, whether that peace settlement happens or whether, under Biden, the drawdown of US forces continues to take place and the US, in a sense, withdraws and therefore basically loses interest in that particular region, then the importance of Pakistan also diminishes. What is there to really pay so much attention to Pakistani interests? So yes, as I myself pointed out, that some of those issues like Kashmir or the CA, etc., may become somewhat salient, but on balance, there is much more substantive interest bringing India and the US together than perhaps I see currently between the US and Pakistan.
Thank you. Indrani ji. Unmute, please.
Thank you, Mr. Saran. There is almost nothing that you have not spoken about, which is very typically you. My sense is that for the time being, I think we won't have the kind of trouble that we envisage with the Biden administration, because I think their focus will remain in the domestic arena. There has been a lot of talk about what the Progressive Caucus might mean for India and whether Biden would have to give in to the Progressive Caucus. Again, just going by the fact that the factionalism in the Democratic Party is quite evident and quite open, I honestly see Biden actually pushing back against a lot of the Progressive Caucus, because it's not just India. I think they intend to take over a larger section of decision making and influence on US domestic policies, and I think that's something that Biden will push back on. So I think we need to wait to see how much Biden will listen to the Progressive Caucus when it comes to issues relating to India. And over there too, I think, CAA, for instance, has not been operationalized. On Kashmir, I think, at least just listening to what our diplomats talk about, etc., the fact that you're having local level elections in Kashmir right now, that leaders, the big problem was that political leaders were in detention. The fact that they're out of detention and that alliance may well win these elections, I think will ease a lot of the questions on that front. However, what I do agree with Mr. Saran is that climate change, putting climate change on the national security table would have implications for us. And I shared his disquiet on John Kerry, because in some strange way, if you go back to 2009 and the first months of an Obama administration, there was an outreach to China on a G2, if we remember, and it was just that China didn't want to have anything to do with the G2, that it didn't go through. But what we should look at very carefully is what are the tools and what are the powers that Kerry has to show success on climate change with his negotiations with China. I mean, if we go back to the Trump years, the fact that Zalmay Khalilzad had to show success in Afghanistan resulted in, I think, a disastrous agreement with the Taliban. And I suspect we will continue to feel the adverse implications of the agreement, the precipitous drawdown in Afghanistan. I think we will feel the consequences of that. I'm just curious, and I would be apprehensive about what Kerry would have to bring to the table if he has to have a climate deal with Biden, and how when Biden has a China that has become much more of an implacable challenger than ever before. How Biden expects to do a climate deal with China and not give in on a whole host of other issues, I would be very, very curious to see, because I don't see the Chinese even believing that they need to do that deal with Biden. I think Kerry might want to do that deal with China. I think the Chinese believe they have won this, and they're out there. They are the dominant power. They have beaten COVID. They have beaten the economic downturn. And I don't see, and I suspect we will see their economic. They do have economic challenges, of course, domestic economic challenges, but I think we will be seeing a lot more of an confident China. There's the economic work conference coming up, or is it on this weekend? And I don't see China wanting to do the deal that America thinks that it will do the deal with. So that's something that we need to watch. I do believe that from an initial, let's say, hesitancy on the Indo-Pacific, I think Biden is coming around more rapidly to the idea of the Indo-Pacific than ever before. I think India needs to be a lot more proactive on the idea of Indo-Pacific, on at least on the reality of the Indo-Pacific going forward. For India specifically, I think one of the things that we benefited from the Trump years was the access to technology, especially to defense technology or to high-tech defense acquisitions. I don't know whether the Biden administration would be that generous in giving us that kind of technological access to their weapon systems, despite the interoperability agreements that we've signed. I will stop here for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more question here, which of course is directed to Ambassador Saran. How will Biden foreign policy, which built around promoting democracy and pursuit of human rights, impact on India and US relationship, in particular in other countries? like China, Pakistan, etc., which is basically a rephrasing of what Indrani just now said about some of the issues that we have in Kashmir or other issues. How will that play? Because I think there is a feeling that Biden may have to say something or act on that. Any views?
Well, I think Indrani has already, I think, put forward her viewpoint that these issues are unlikely to be very important in terms of the India-US relationship under Biden. To a large extent, I agree. I did, however, sort of flag them as possible areas of concern going forward, because we do not know how much of, for example, influence some of the very progressive wing of the Democratic Party may have in determining the Biden approach to human rights, whether it is in China or whether it is in some of the other countries. It is something that we should in a sense keep on our table and be mindful that this could become an issue. But yes, I agree that there are strong enough drivers of the strategic partnership between India and the US for this not to become a constraint going forward. But it is a point of vulnerability that I would still flag. That's my point. And there is no doubt that there will be a focus on, say, human rights situation, certainly in China, because that will be one of the levers to put pressure on China. So now what you have seen with respect to the Xinjiang issue, today there was a very disturbing report that Alibaba, one of the largest firms, has actually been, advising people on the software return. Now that is something that really causes considerable concern. It's not just a human rights issue, but I think all of us should be very concerned that there is something like this which is being trotted out. So I think those issues will come up. Whether they will impact adversely on India is a separate issue. But as I said, I would still like to sort of put that as some point of vulnerability. But that this administration, unlike the Trump administration, will want to be seen is far more focused on human rights issues, on democracy promotion. That is a given. I think we should expect that.
Professor Gautam Sen has come. Your question I had put to the panelists, and they have no sort of information to share with you that this quantification of leadership has started, or there's any proposal for it. So in case you want to supplement your question, please do.
No, I'm very keen to understand the leadership that is going to unfold in the post-COVID situation. And we have always shied away, to my mind, from a social science perspective, to understand that which way the leaders are going to lead their own countries, keeping their own viewpoints and own priorities, in fact. And China definitely is a major power to reckon with, which way they are thinking, as Shyamji said very correctly, that you cannot underestimate China, because they think that whatever they have, and they are not going to budge an inch from there. So how do we bring about a unified way of looking at the world in a perspective which will be beneficial to one and all, rather than looking at each individual nation state's own priorities as it is coming, especially in the post-COVID, what's called scenario. It is a well-known fact in amongst the scientific community that COVID-19 may have been caused by very many other factors also. How it happened, we will never come to know because those things will never come up on the surface. So my point is that for me, the leadership and the perception of the leadership is much more important to understand the polemics as to what is going to happen to the world today. And how does it, it's not a question, I'm worried about it. That's why I pose that question of quantification of leadership. Is it perceptional? Is it a realist way of looking at it? Is it constructivist? Or is it transactional? Which way the leadership is going to go? Is Joe Biden going to be transactional or transformational? Is China going to be merely transactional and not transformational? And India, seeing that what the problems are, both domestically and internationally, which way will it go? Now, these are $100 million questions, for which we do not have any answer as yet. But certainly, the quantification of these things are essential, though I'm not a great propagator of number crunching and trying to figure out that correlation coefficients is only going to give the correct answer to the decision making, but they are important fact. I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Actually, we are discussing Biden. We are
Yeah.
not discussing the larger issue of how to quantify, but if Ambassador Saran wants to respond again to...
Well, all that I can say is that most certainly there is requirement for a much more statesman-like, not really leaders, but statesmen. That is how I would look at the current situation, because most of the challenges which we face today are really cross-cutting and global challenges. They are not amenable to solution through actions taken by single states or even a cluster of states. They truly require global responses. They require cross-cutting responses. And if you have to have cross-cutting responses, the only way that those multilateral institutions need to be properly funded, then they need political support from major leaders of the world. But today, if you ask me what is the prevailing situation is one precisely what Professor Sen has said, is essentially transactional. So the COVID-19 was a classic global challenge, which actually could have triggered that kind of a global response, collaborative response, not a competitive response. But essentially what you are seeing is a competitive response. After all, you look at some of the major, advanced countries, all of them are busy cornering as many supplies of vaccines as possible. They are not thinking in terms of how there should be a proper, equitable distribution of vaccines, so that developing countries, poorer countries who cannot afford the cost, they are also assisted in getting inoculated. No, there is no such concern. So, what is the nature of the leadership today that we are confronted with? It is transactional. That's what it is. We do not have statesman-like, responses. Depressing, but that's the reality.
I have one last question, which is very naive, very layman-like. In many matters, India has been lurching to the right and following the American lead so far. Will Biden change and force a change in that respect, and thereafter it will impact on the kind of policy that we are also recently developed towards China?
Well, it is difficult to see, which direction Biden is able to take the United States of America. Because although the intent is liberal, quite clearly the intent is liberal. If you look at his appointments to his cabinet, it is a liberal cabinet. If you are looking at his policy pronouncements, quite clearly he wants to move in the liberal direction. So if you're talking about the focus on human rights, for example, if you are talking about democracy promotion, there is no doubt that this is a president who wants to restore, in a sense, the liberal tradition of the United States. Now, the question is, how much can he succeed? Now, success will only be possible if there is some way of overcoming the kind of very sharp polarization which we today see in the US. Not only polarization between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, but you see the United States society split right in the middle. So the fact that despite all the chaos he has caused, Trump can still have a solid vote of more than 45% says something. So the right kind of lurch that you see in the United States is not something which is an ephemeral thing. It is probably related to much deeper forces at work in American society, which, by the way, I would also say about India. That some of what you see today is actually driven by much deeper forces that are operating. So, which way will Biden be able to take the United States? Much will depend upon this very important domestic agenda that he has set. And as I said right in the beginning, that the focus is going to be, at least for quite some time to come, the focus is going to be on the domestic. Not so much on the external. We think that it will be a lot external, but I don't think so. I think that the focus will be much more on the domestic side. So if that is going to be the focus, then the external dimension that you are looking for, Halder, that external dimension will very much be determined by what happens internally in the United States. So that's my sense.
Thank you. We do not have any question. I think I will request both Ambassador Sain and Ambassador Saran to give their closing remarks. So that
I think we have said whatever had to be said. But yeah, let's hear Ronan. I think he has been very quiet. So let us hear what he has to say on this whole series of subjects.
Yeah, but Shyam, you're supposed to give a lecture, so I think you've made it.
No, I was not supposed to give it. I was supposed to have a conversation with you, which you very studiously directed in a direction that you had to say very little.
I just want to give a couple of postscripts.
Yeah.
Let's say on human rights, on China, it's one thing I have noticed, maybe you'll correct me on this, is that unlike, during the Bush period, Bush presidency, right, both during his first term and second term, the focus was very much not just on Xinjiang, but on Tibet also. Tibet, leading to the highest honor being given, and his conversation with Hu Jintao, telling him that President Hu, I'll tell you something which you will not like, but nonetheless, I thought I'll share with you in advance rather than coming as a shock. He said, I'm going to receive the Dalai Lama, His Holiness Dalai Lama, in the Oval Office. He's saying, I don't like it at all, etc., went on. And he's saying something more, I'll tell you, which you won't like even more. I'm going to give him America's highest award, the Presidential Gold Medal, which was there. And yeah, I attended that event, etc. So that kind of high-profile engagement with the Dalai Lama and his various constituencies, including Senator Feinstein and the others. There was a strong Tibet movement there, which we are aware of for a long time. That stopped with the Obama administration because he became very ambivalent, and increasingly we have been very ambivalent also. So let's put that also, when you're talking of China's internal affairs, something which affects us as much, sometimes even more, that has not been addressed. That's one sort of footnote, and you might clarify it. Maybe this is an oversimplification. And not just on the Dalai Lama, but elsewhere also, the other lamas also. We have been a little bit ambivalent on that. The other aspect is where I think Indrani made a very valid point, but very frankly, one area where there's a disappointment, and on both sides, is that in the defense relationship, in defense technologies, all that we have so far gained, even when you have the STA1 status, where we are the 37th country, but the third in Asia, and the other foundational agreements, so far at least, they have not resulted in any significant technology transfer, only enabled the sale of high-tech equipments, etc., which we actually signed, some of the most sensitive we signed even in 2008 before I left there. That is, so that is one, but I think that's one area where we take it forward according to the provisions of the 2005 agreement. I'm not going even beyond that. So we have not even come to the stage of co-production, let alone co-development. So that's that. So with those two comments, and I'll leave it at that. And there was, of course, another issue which is going to be very important, is Biden's ambitions or his focus on his legacy will largely be dependent on his ability also to get through things through the Congress. And because if his ability is limited only to executive decisions, that will be limited in terms of scope, and it's not going to have a longer term impact, whether it's on trade, economic issues, or on any other issue generally. So these are sort of footnote comments. But so closing remarks are yours, Shyam.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I really don't have very much to add to what I have already said, but to take up the issue of Tibet, as you have seen that the Trump administration in its waning months has in fact upgraded the the status of the Tibet government in exile by, for the first time, receiving Sikyong, the prime minister of the Tibet before, and could be an effort to try and see whether the Biden administration, in a sense, has its hands tied by this last flash of great, a sort of concern about Tibet, and they might find it difficult to reconcile from that, or to try and mute it. But that remains to be seen. What has to be realized is that what Hu Jintao may have, in a sense, been annoyed about, but in a sense accepted, this administration in China may not react the same way. So there is there is also likely to be a much greater sort of a counter from the Chinese side than has been the case before. And I think India should not get caught in the crossfire between the two sides. I think my own view has been for quite some time that it is actually in the interests of India and China that while His Holiness the Dalai Lama is still alive and has tremendous amount of influence both on Tibetans in India as well as Tibetans in Tibet, that some kind of an understanding, some kind of a reconciliation with the Chinese side should actually come about, because that will also, in a sense, diminish our problem going forward. Because once His Holiness is not there, the kind of militancy which is there in the Tibetan community, especially amongst the younger elements in the Tibetan community, that could surface in ways that we may not be able to handle. So it is not that we are using them against China, but that is how China will see it. And it may become a more live kind of a issue between the two sides than it is currently. So I think we have to look at this a little carefully. The other aspect which you mentioned, Ronan, about the technology transfer, this has been a issue on a number of other areas. Because what the United States does say when you say, oh, but technology transfer is not taking place, you say, well, the government has made it possible for US companies to engage in technology transfer with you, but we cannot force them to transfer technology to you. So you have to get into agreements with Lockheed Martin, or you have to get into agreements with Boeing, etc., so that you make it worthwhile for them to transfer that technology. And if that transfer of technology is to take place because you have got into a project with them, the government of the United States will not stand in the way. So the US government's role, as they explain it, is we are only an enabling role. And this I have come across again and again. For example, this is the same thing which we had been arguing about, for example, in the climate change negotiations. Because there is a commitment for technology transfer in the UNFCCC. But when it actually comes to saying, well, climate-friendly technologies, there must be a way to transfer them to developing countries, they say, sorry, these are proprietary technologies, they belong to private sector. You make it worth their while to come and invest in your country to, do better IPR protection, and then it will come. We will not stand in the way, but we can't take that technology and give it to you. So there is a disconnect there, which I think sometimes we don't quite understand in our system, because we are so much used to, dealing, say, with the Russians, where it is in the hands of the state whether or not that technology transfer takes place. It's not quite the same situation with the US. Okay, so
yeah, that's
thank
what
you.
you said is very much taken on board, but it's a fact. All that I'm saying
Yes.
is it's a fact, and the
Yeah,
same is true with Israel also. It's a fact that we are not going to get any significant technology.
Sure. I think we should be mindful of that, and because we have higher expectations than are perhaps warranted.
Exactly.
But do we then follow, like what the Chinese say, absorb and then reproduce?
Well, we should have been doing it for years. After all, when you bought the MiG-19s or the MiG-21 or the Sukhois, all that you did was license production in India.
Yeah.
So you see, there was no system that you put in place, an ecosystem where whatever is coming in as technology. First, there is a stage of adoption. Second is a stage of assimilation. And that then sets the stage for generation. Then you start generating technology. But you have to go through that process. See, we only adopt, we have adopted one generation, that becomes obsolete, then we adopt another generation. But we don't do assimilation.
Well, we have come to the time set by you, Ambassador Saran. So it's been a very lively discussion. We learned a number of things that will help us in, because we are more concerned with the learning for spotting and managing the internal issues that will come up, because this will come up out of business, this will come out of immigration issues, this will come out of the other defense related issues. But there is a tendency not to prepare, internal side I'm talking about, there's a tendency not to prepare for it. So that is what this meeting was, and I think it greatly fulfilled that. I thank both Ambassador Sen and Ambassador Saran and Indrani and other panelists for sharing their thoughts with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. All the best.
Have a COVID-free Happy New Year.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to everyone.
Okay.